Hello, everyone. Actually, we're going to give everyone just another minute or so to come in. We'll get started. It's so exciting to see you all. Welcome. So I'm Callie Watkins Liu. I use the she series pronouns. I'm the director of Jedi Curriculum, Pedagogy, and Faculty Support here at the IHP in the Jedi office. And today I am joined by Tasneem Pota and Tony Sindelar, both for instructional design. And we're doing the workshop about auditing your syllabus for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I think Tasneem just put in the chat, we have a Dropbox there so you can get the slides. Reminder to make sure that you want to have your syllabus because you'll definitely have time to be able to go through that today. General things, make sure your audio is muted. You're encouraged to share your video, but it's never required to do whatever feels comfortable for you. Yep, we can do the Dropbox link again. And so the session is going to be recorded, but just for the parts that we're presenting, all the discussion parts, we're going to pause the recording for that. Then it can be a living resource for people to use after that as well. So do the next slide. So goals for our workshop today, we're going to talk about the role of having a Jedi syllabus. We're going to identify and examine the hidden curriculum and assumptions. We're going to analyze 6 equity-minded practices, reflect and apply the equity-minded practices for your own syllabus. So really we're walking through this framework and then having opportunities to apply it to your own work and come back together. Next one. So we're doing a 90-minute session today. This is our second time doing this workshop, and there was so much conversation that we're like 1 hour is not enough. So we have 90 minutes this time. So I have our presentation, breakout room activity, and then a larger group discussion. Again, as I mentioned, having your own syllabus. There's a workshop guide that you'll be able to access the Dropbox, the slide deck. I think we covered we're all quite familiar with Zoom at this point. But, generally try to make sure to begin with your name when you speak. Again, I think we're all pretty familiar with our Zoom world. Yeah, thank you. And then let's do our next one. So again, kind of our agenda of how we're moving through everything, our introductions, why do syllabi matter, hidden curriculum, understanding your own positionality, introduction to equity-minded practices, your solo impaired reflection, and then a debrief. And so just to get us started, if in the chat, people could just share their name and department and what brought you to this workshop? It's like, what's one thing you're hoping to get out of today? Whenever you're ready, you can feel free to put that in. Wanting to make syllabus inclusive at Indigo and CSD, hoping to make concrete changes to the course syllabus. Sam, nursing, continually trying to improve Jedi approach. Karen, nursing, hoping the workshop helps facilitate. Lisa Quinn, improved syllabus way it's presented, make more inclusive and welcoming. Entry-level OT, entry-level program, improve knowledge. New to the IHP, welcome, Kevin. Make changes to your syllabus. Always learning from Jedi, looking for inclusive approaches, hoping to make a positive improvement, make course more inclusive, hoping to support faculty, PhD and RS faculty in syllabus and course updates that reflect Jedi, and for your own syllabus, equity and inclusion, you're interested in it. Making changes and improvements to the syllabus. School of Healthcare Leadership want to start with the right foundation for the courses in the new MHA program. Thank you, Deb. I'm sure I didn't get everything. But thank you all. Hoping to improve your syllabus and CPD experiences. Yeah, so we have quite a few different departments in here. We have people where this is their first time. There are people where they're trying to kick things off the right way, where you're actually reviewing, where you're going to be making concrete changes. So we have a range of things in here. And what we are hoping in this is that this should hopefully be a space where you're able to, whether this is your first time in this workshop, first time doing this, or if you've been here before, there should always be something that we can figure out how do you want to go deeper in there, or what part do you want to fine tune even more, and to absolutely walk out with some concrete ideas for your own syllabi. All right. So we're going to go on to Tasneem.
Thank you. So as we're here for a audit workshop, so why should we even look at the syllabus? Why does the syllabus matter? So most often syllabus are seen as contract and official record of the course between students and instructors, but rather it should be framed as an invitation and an emphasis on the opportunities for learning that the course will present. Hence, it is critical to use the syllabus as a tool for inclusion. It is the first introduction to you for your course. It's a communication device, a learning tool. It can set the tone for the relationship you have with your class, the expectations around learning, and how that will relate to the materials. It's an important guide that can reflect many teaching assumptions, values, and beliefs. So overall, it's a reflection of a course. With that concept, we're going to speak more about looking the syllabus as a lens, but there are other pieces too. So next slide. Today, the focus is about syllabus, but as you can see through this image, it emphasizes that syllabus is just one piece of your course to build classroom culture and inclusivity. Your course comprises of many essential artifacts, from learning materials to how the content has been delivered through assessments and mode of communication that are equally important in communicating and building a classroom culture. To share, sometimes you really add a reading about race to the syllabus, but then do not discuss it or connect it with the learning activities or in your discussion. So that's what we should avoid doing it, and be sure that we are able to relate it with the context and bring that in some form in our class activities or through discussion. Next slide. So speaking about how does all of this relate to JEDI, with few exceptions, usually higher education institutes were found and designed to serve white students, particularly those that are male, middle to upper class, heterosexual, able-bodied, and Christian. Despite the increase in diversity of the Indian American college student population, many of the higher education policies and practices have not been reconfigured to equitably support, affirm, and validate students from racially, ethnically minorized groups. So as artifacts of practice, the syllabus can reinforce and reproduce the norms and rules that generally align with the experience of white students, or the syllabus could counter those norms and rules. So how can we do it? So in particular, the syllabus, the faculty can use syllabi to demystify the implicit norms and ambiguous proposes that characterize college as how to be successful student. Syllabus, you can tone it as a welcome thing, can welcome them into a classroom where they will be cared for and validate the pursuit of college degree and the ability to be successful. You can send message that while students need to work hard in college, faculty are there to support and work in a partnership with them. Finally, syllabus can affirm the belonging of racially and ethnically minorized students in higher education by representing the experiences in the course materials and by deconstructing the presentation of white students and white experiences as the norm. Many of these dynamics are implicit in our syllabi. It's important that we learn to make those invisible assumptions visible. For racially, ethnically minorized students who have experienced exclusion, marginalization, discrimination, and oppression in educational settings and elsewhere, syllabus can be used as a tool for equity-minded practices. So together we will be going through 6 equity-minded practices in today's seminar. Next slide. So what is equity-mindedness? It is characterized as being race-conscious in a positive sense, aware how one's beliefs, knowledge, approaches can disadvantage racially ethnically minority students, even if the intention is to be race-neutral, willing to take responsibilities for eliminating inequalities and to change practices accordingly, aware that policies and practices in higher education can perpetuate racial ethnic hierarchies, even in the absence of racial explicit racism. In a book that was long time back read at IHP, From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, there's an important quote which says that equity-minded practitioners do not blame students for the lack of success, which is a deficient-minded approach, nor do they rely on racial stereotypes or biases to justify or disregard inequitable outcomes. So an equity-minded practitioner accepts that race and racism are endemic in higher education. And equity-minded practitioners work proactively to address those inequalities. So next, we're going to look at how the instructor positionality, like even not just students, even the position of the instructor is important, and acknowledge the hidden curriculum. So over to you, Callie.
So when we've talked about this before, we're talking about kind of a syllabus and a context of structural power inequalities that play out within higher education and then really affect our students as well. So it's really about having a consciousness and making choices. And one thing that we wanted to make sure to bring in this time was also acknowledging the positionality of the instructor. And how the experiences of instructors who are white versus minoritized instructors are a little bit different. So I know for myself as a professor, when I'm setting the tone in my classroom, sometimes I'm really making sure to extra set the tone that, like, no, I need you to understand that I'm the professor here. Because usually it might be assumed that I'm not one. So there are different choices I might be making depending on what content I'm dealing with, how I'm engaging with this. That are different than like my white colleagues might need to do. So it's more about kind of acknowledging what is your positionality and being conscious of like, well, what's the tone that I'm setting or that I want to set that is really productive and helpful for the students, but also, especially if I'm thinking about myself, again, as a minoritized faculty member, ways that actually set me up so that I can be kind of protected in my classroom. So this article here, and we share it later, was one that came out inside higher ed, what BIPOC professors need for students. And it goes through a few different things, but it's kind of acknowledging the different ways that faculty of color might be treated by students. And so it's kind of guidance on like, well, defaults start from professor. And then if we say to call us by the first name, then you call by first name. But I thought this was a helpful kind of artifact that gives kind of acknowledges that different positionality. So this is just, there's no specific like right or wrong, but it's more just that consciousness and acknowledgement as going into and thinking about it. And when we're making these choices about our syllabi for ourselves. So go next.
Hi, everybody. Tony here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the hidden curriculum. And this is a term that you've already heard mentioned in this session. And we want to go a little bit further in terms of talking about what that means and specifically how that plays out in syllabi. So if you haven't heard of this term hidden curriculum before, it's kind of like, what are the secret unwritten rules of higher education? And these may be rules that some students enter higher educational spaces already knowing. It may be rules that some students are really good at picking up right away. And then it may also be rules that are completely oblivious, completely invisible to other students who are therefore kind of disadvantaged by that. So we want you to think a little bit about what this looks like with regard to your own syllabi. And there's some prompts and places to take notes on that on the second page of the workshop guide, if you are so inclined there. But these are kind of 5 aspects of the hidden curriculum in terms of how it plays out in your syllabus. 4 of these are from the Inclusion by Design, and then we added a 5th one as well. So first up is kind of the implicit rules. So these are formal and informal rules that are important to you, but go unstated. And I think this is something that we are all guilty of at some place in terms of there may be things that we as instructors feel are very important in terms of how the classroom is going to run, how the course is going to operate over the course of the semester, how students are going to interact with each other, how students are expected to interact with you. But what goes unstated versus what is made kind of transparent and visible to all students. So some people will take steps to kind of like establish, for example, different types of ground rules or policies in their syllabus. But basically, what do you kind of just assume people know, which might be dangerous, versus try to use the syllabus as a document to clarify what's going on. Then there's the kind of implicit messages about what does your syllabus convey about the nature of your course. And this is a place where I think it can be really helpful to look at that syllabus and the language we use in syllabi and think about, again, we've already introduced the idea that many people approach the idea of a syllabus as a contract, but then what kind of language is present in that contract? And what does that say to a student about the nature of their relationship with you, what the course is going to be like, how they will get help or not. And I think a lot of times we can have unintended messages in our syllabi that convey perhaps not what we would want, or things that would discourage certain types of students from existing or being successful in our profession or in our program or in that particular course. So thinking about how we kind of communicate to students how they are going to be successful in that. Hidden biases, of course, comes up, in terms of what do we assume about students, perhaps life experiences or other academic experiences that they're approaching our course with, versus considering the range of experiences that they are coming in. Teaching philosophy. So some of you may or may not have had to craft a teaching philosophy statement at some point, which basically is like, this is what I believe about teaching and learning. And though we don't necessarily have a specific paragraph that says that in our syllabus, there's a lot in the syllabus that you do have in terms of your policies, how you talk about assignments, how you talk about your course in general, that is communicating to students what is your philosophy. And basically, there's always the question of, are you communicating what you want to be communicating, or are you perhaps communicating something different? And people have different philosophies with how they think about teaching and learning, and there are, I think, certainly some prevalent ones in the health professions. But you might think about, what does your own syllabus communicate in terms of like the nature of knowledge, what getting help looks like, who is the expert, what is the role of the expert, what is the role of the instructor, and does that line up with what you want? I think there's the huge challenge that syllabus is like, it's, for a lot of people, it's kind of this big formal document, and it's a very first impression-y kind of document. And is it the first impression that you want students to have? Is it an accurate first impression? We want those first impressions hopefully not only to be good, but accurate. And then finally, as Tasneem has already talked about, higher education is, at its foundation, is not free of bias by any means whatsoever. What are we doing in our own courses and in our syllabus as a document that might be reinforcing or replicating ways that higher education operates that disadvantages some students and advantages others? And where can we perhaps challenge those norms or expectations? And we'll kind of touch on that more in some of the other topics later in today's session. So I just wanted to get you started thinking here about the hidden curriculum and what is already perhaps being communicated in your syllabus, and is it what we really want? I think I'm going to hand it back over to Callie, who's going to talk about unpacking assumptions.
Yeah, I want to actually, can we just stay on this slide for a minute, Tony, the revealing the curriculum? I know Tony walked through a whole lot of that, and before we go into the assumptions, I thought maybe we can linger on this a little bit. And you can feel free to either come off mute or put it in the chat. But when you think about implicit rules, kind of formal and informal rules that are important to you but go unstated, are there any ones that come up to mind for you?
Callie, can you repeat the end of what you said, because it kind of cut out a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. I said, thinking about the implicit rules, so formal and informal rules that are really important for you but go unstated. So we can start generating any of those. So respectful communication. Thank you, Karen. Do I have any other ones? Etiquette with peers and the instructor. Timely communication. Agree with Karen. I always agree with Karen. That's my implicit rule. I understood what you were saying, Mitch. Don't suffer in silence. When in doubt, reach out. Some people assume emails get replied to within 24 hours, but that is an unwritten rule not everyone has agreed to. You aren't really participating if your camera is off. That's an implicit rule. Treat each other respectfully. Thank you. So these are all things that are like important to you, but a lot of times we might not make them explicit. We may judge people, other students, or evaluate how much you're engaged or not, but how much we're making all these things really explicit all the time. Please reach out with questions. And I'm going to switch to the next one just for us to sit with these a little bit. Our implicit messages. What unwritten messages does your syllabus convey about you or your course? If you have your syllabus with you, or if you think about a syllabus in general, you know, what might be the implicit messages that might pop up?
I think there's an implicit message in one of our boilerplate things that makes it sound like it's easy to ask for help. Like if you need it, just ask, like that there's not a hurdle.
Thank you. That's very helpful for our assumptions. Right. The implicit message of rigidity. It feels to me like a big challenge to create a proper curriculum, but hopefully we can ask students to give us their feedback. Really, again, that point about asking for help can be really hard. This is getting into these assumptions parts, but like there's those rules that we have. So how are we judging people? The messages of what we're communicating with them. Big things that we're that I find always being communicated within the messages within the syllabus is like who do I see as successful or not? But what does it mean to succeed in here? So there's like all kinds of messages around that.
Callie, can I say that I've been doing some work with this, but when I look at our syllabus, the template that we're given, the language, the implicit message is there's some institutional corporate rules that are almost like legalese that are part of this, that it isn't something that I wrote as a faculty member. It is something that is written by the institution and implies compliance. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So actually there's a message like whose syllabus is this or whose space is this even? We got one that it can feel cold. Not very human-centered. Thank you. About biases. So your syllabus assumes independence of moving through D2L when it is tricky. Oh, that comes up so many times. Teaching philosophy. We'll definitely be getting into bias even more. But thinking about kind of your teaching philosophy too, like, are you communicating your teaching philosophy? Think about what is your teaching philosophy? And then syllabus assumes learners know how to navigate resources. This is one, thank you for bringing all of this in. I just wanted to let us sit with this for a little bit. We're going to go into the assumptions, but keep thinking also about like, what is it that's really valuable to you and how it might be reflected in documents or not. And thinking about the racial inequality. So does your hidden curriculum, all these things that go unsaid, are they challenging or reinforcing our existing inequalities? And you know, if it's not counteracting the existing inequalities, it is just reinforcing them. Syllabus assumes students know how to manage time through the course. There's a lot of assumptions about who the student is. You can go to the next one, Tony. Okay, so with unpacking our assumptions. So we're going to go through a few different examples. Making sense of the syllabus is challenging for those with language differences like dyslexia. Does not acknowledge or account for neurodiversity of learning styles, as neurotypical language and expectations, and even formatting actually. Think about that too. So as we're going to go through these different assumptions now, we're going to think about kind of what assumptions might we be caring about students when we imagine a homogeneous privileged population. So like if you're assuming the most privileged, most homogeneous population, what are the assumptions we're having? So you might assume that that you might not need to work. You might assume a familiarity with you know, you might be able to assume that you're able to have access to a car. You might assume familiarity and comfort with your professors, so it's easy for you to go talk to all of them. So they're like, think about this, like, what are the assumptions that we're carrying? when we're first just imagining a privileged and unhomogeneous population. We can do the next one. How do these assumptions change when we acknowledge social inequities and a diversity of experiences and realities? How do these assumptions change when we acknowledge neurodiversity? How do these assumptions change when we acknowledge that racial disparities and racism that happens? How do these change when we're acknowledging differences in resources? What kinds of assumptions change when we acknowledge all of these different things that we know exist in society and are also existing within our students? And we do the last one. And then what does it look like to assume the best of your students and to set them up to succeed? So knowing that there's all different types of students, all different types of contexts and realities coming, and that there are inequalities and barriers, what does it mean to start off assuming that every student is here to really succeed? Every student is here because they want to do the best. And therefore, when there are challenges, what do we build in to actually facilitate that process? So going away from a deficit mindset to being like, no, we know that we're working on this together. How do we set you up to succeed? All right, so let's go on to the next one. So here's the first assumption. So we can have an assumption that poor writing suggests limited intellectual ability. It is misleading to equate students' writing skills with their intellectual ability. Students have a varying degree of experience with academic writing. So before we go into this, we're getting that kind of our equity response to this. Have any of you ever experienced this kind of assumption with the syllabus or around students? I certainly have. Like if there's like a typo in a sentence, something like that, well, therefore you must not be able to do this class or something like that. And let's go and see what an equity response could be to this. So an equity response is to understand that you have a responsibility to be explicit about what is expected and share with students examples of good writing done by other students. So a general rule of thumb, if it's something that's important, you want to give an example, you want to model it, show it. You should also alert students early on if their need to improve their writing and should suggest resources to them. So instead of it being like, oh, I'm seeing challenges and we just kind of let everything drop, said, oh, okay, what resources do we put in? How do we let people know early on? And how do we kind of open conversations to have room for improvement? So it doesn't just have to be a zero sum. So I think a very common assumption, again, that can be inside of built into a syllabus, and ways that we can actually counteract that, really being explicit, providing resources, and by identifying channels of how we're going to be giving feedback. And do the next one. So going back to your own syllabus, like what hidden assumptions have you identified? I don't know if you all have your syllabi with you, but if you think about your own syllabus, what assumptions do you have? More assumptions that your syllabus might identify? Oh, I also saw this one, that syllabi are generally not very age friendly for those of us non-digital natives, becoming learners after many years away from school. Assumptions about what the age group, the familiarity that people are coming in with. Let's do the next ones, Tony. I think we can do the next two just together. And then when we're looking at these, again, revisiting again, when we're looking at the assumptions, how are they reinforcing or challenging existing inequality? So you want to keep doing that. And really trying to think about what does an equity-minded approach look like in this example. So when we identify the assumptions that are being built into it, when we're looking at how they're kind of relating to existing inequalities, and think about what does it mean to be proactive? What needs to be made explicit? What kinds of resources are there? And what kind of structures or norms do you want to put in there to actually counteract these obstacles? So let's go to our next one. So we have these 6 equity-minded practices that are like a helpful lens for when we're reviewing our syllabi and thinking about what we're communicating. Can you go to the next one, please? So the 6 general ones that we have is demystifying, welcoming, validating, partnership, representing, deconstructed, and that equity-minded mindset that we've been talking about so far. You can do the next one. So in deconstructing, so we already talked about the power inequities that are already just built inside of higher education and all of these fields in society. So it's actually powerful to acknowledge those and kind of build that into our syllabus. So for example, in this syllabus, they had this quote from Bell Hooks that's really existing, talking about the problems of dominant norms. But part of what we want to do is make sure that we're actually questioning the presentation of either white students as the norm or whiteness as the norm, but acknowledging the power that's existing within our context. So we can build things into our syllabus that acknowledge that there are inequalities and that there already is that there is systemic inequality and so on that is manifested all the time. And that really helps set the tone for people to kind of promote awareness and critical examination of the dominant norms, making them visible, then we can examine them and have that critical questioning coming in the whole time. And it sets the tone for that type of engagement for yourselves and the students. Thank you for sharing that, Leslie. All right, let's do the next one on demystifying. So demystifying. The demystifying is actually when so all those things that we're talking about, the hidden assumptions, the hidden curriculum, the hidden rules, the hidden values, and all of those things, we actually want to make all of that really explicit. So these are different ways that we demystify that process, all of those assumptions. So we have two different examples. One from Lauren Zipsey, where in her syllabus, she has a box that explains where you can get help. How do you get the help, when you can get the help, what type of help for D2L, for instance, when to reach out, how to reach out, where to go if you're having any challenges, who you can reach out to with Jedi-related issues. Tony's also has a breakdown about how to get help and so on, and also really explaining what it means to actually, how you get an A in this course. So what does success look like? Instead of just assuming everybody has the same exact understanding or experiences or expectations, being clear and really being explicit. So if there's things that you really value that you find that you're holding always, is it being reflected there? And when you're looking at that, is there something else in your mind that maybe you end up saying at some point or ends up influencing how you're grading that isn't in the syllabus somewhere? How do we make that transparent? How do we make that explicit? So this part of the demystifying syllabus. I can do the next one. Oh, wait, no, I thought we had one more example of demystifying. Oh, no, excuse me, sorry. So we have also our welcoming language. So we've talked about language a bit, and the language just kind of sets up what kind of a tone you're setting for your classroom with the language that you're using in your syllabus. So we'll go between these two different examples, example 1 and example 2. And I'd just like you to think about which one feels more welcoming to you. So example 1. Some of the specific skills I hope you will obtain in this course are listed below. Being a critical consumer of information about mental processes and behavior is important. All of these activities will help you become one, and it is my hope that you will use the skills in your daily life. Example 2. Some of the specific skills you should obtain in this course are listed below. Because you are not yet a critical consumer of information about mental processes and behavior, all of these activities will help you become one, and if you're motivated enough, use the skills in your daily life. So you just put it in the chat. For you, which one felt more welcoming? Example 1 or example 2? More welcome. All right, we're seeing a lot of ones. All right, and then if anyone find out how passive the language is.
Like, sorry, Callie, it's Sam. Can I just speak? The way it says like that it's being a critical consumer is important. I feel like that might be hard for some students to break down. Like, how do I do that thing? Like, what do you want me to do? So like, I think I would say like, by completing these activities, you will become like, I just feel like something about the sentence structure makes it feel like it's something that happens to the student. And maybe that's unclear. It's unclear to me, I guess.
No, I appreciate that. Because they're all, and actually I also want to point out this part about how actually the syllabus is always in process too. So even if you're like, okay, well, it's able to have this tone that's setting a little bit warmer. Okay, what else can we make explicit? How can we keep refining that? So I actually really appreciate that in here. And felt more human-centered. Yeah, but I think with each of these rings, like we are setting a certain kind of tone or like giving this information. So how do we want to be thoughtful about that? And what is the tone? So actually I'm going to, thank you. Let me actually pass it over to Tasneem for some more. I'm sorry, I took a little bit of too much that I wasn't supposed to.
No worries. So just to continue with welcoming, and Callie has said about the expectations, like the whole purpose of having welcoming students and creating a classroom culture in which they feel cared for. You're communicating care and support, establishing respect and inclusion. So looking at these two examples, I think they just help us to understand that how language in syllabus often shapes students' first impression of the instructors, and how learners can determine that faculty's attitude towards the teaching and learning and what kind of help they can get. With the next slide, we wanted to share two of examples, real examples from our own IHP faculty through their syllabi, where Lauren Zipsey and Bonnie, they both shared with us. And these were, we really found the tone, the welcoming tone, the message that they had in the syllabus to be very great. Of just with Lauren's, you see that acknowledging that you've taught the syllabus for several years, and each time it's a different experience where students bring a lot of contribution and working together, and what those participation looks like. Even Bonnie has a similar tone and welcoming note in her syllabus, where she put forward that how each time they work together, allocating the time, observations, and open to getting that feedback and continuously learning from students. So just the tone, how you're putting it, really helps students to even know how friendly or open the instructor is. Okay, so this was about the third practice, welcoming. The next one is, next slide, Tony, validating. So this is about validating that how students' ability is to be successful, and that could be communicating a belief that all students are expected to succeed, but then how do we do that? You articulate that to the students, regardless of whatever the intentions are, capable of obtaining the educational goals, offer different types of assignments, and offer forms of assessment that help students, gives them students different ways, multiple ways to demonstrate their learning and strength. So we're going to look at this text, and again, what are the ways that you feel that this language feels validating? And if you're a student and you read this, does it invite you in or make you feel more on the edge? So I'm looking forward to working with each of you this semester. I've taught this course several times, and I'm always impressed by the quality work my students produce. I'm confident that you will also create a strong collection of writing at the end of the semester. Remember, writing is a process and it takes work, but being registered for this class is a good step towards becoming a better writer. So let's take a moment and again, just drop in to the chat that whether you feel the tone, the language, is this a message which is validating students, putting them to be successful? Is that message being clear? Sam says it's very warm. Yes, it's warm and inviting. Afraid that I won't measure up to previous students' work quality. Yeah, acknowledging that it can be challenging at times. Agree, like reference to past students' work is not necessarily predicting performance, not helpful. Yeah, I'm just reading over all the chats. Yeah. So with Susan's chat, it is warm, but would be nice to mention the richness the students bring to the experience. Yes, John is saying it's always encouraging. It's an encouraging tone, but like Kathleen said, I usually include it in my welcome email instead of the course syllabus. Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think this kind of like brings example, and I'm looking at different lenses. That it is encouraging students, but there is some part which you could like have a better language, have a better tone, and acknowledging students' knowledge and build confidence and trust. So thank you. So I think we can go with the last two of our practices, partnership, representing, and I'm thinking it's Tony.
Hi, everybody. It's Tony again. So fifth equity-minded practice we wanted to talk about is this idea of partnership and how and where your syllabus communicates the idea that faculty and students are partnering together. This, I'll admit, I think is good teaching practice in general, but certainly comes from the constructivist approach to teaching and learning that I have embraced for many years now. So I think it's really important to review your syllabi and think about how do you communicate what that commitment to working with students is going to be like? How will you kind of help support them toward a path of success? What you expect of them, but also what can they expect from you as an instructor? Sometimes this includes language about articulating a willingness to receive feedback from students about your own teaching, as well as a willingness to use a variety of teaching approaches to hopefully connect with different types of learners. I think a big part of kind of building these partnerships is communicating a sufficient level of respect to students as learners, and acknowledging that our students are adults, they are autonomous, they are future professionals, and that we want them to be successful ultimately, because that's why they're here. I think that unfortunately some syllabi end up with these sections of student requirements or student responsibilities that can feel very punitive in nature. The example on the right here is a syllabus that was shared with permission here, and I invite you to take a look at it to the extent that you're able to read the screenshot on the slide. And so this is from an authentic syllabus, and just thinking about what would it feel like to read that as a student in the course, and what does that tell you about your relationship, or what you might expect your relationship, your partnership with an instructor to be? And I guess I'll just kind of share here that I'm not a fan of this kind of model, but being aware of how we do this. I think I see a lot of student responsibility sections that get added to year over year, and they're basically like a list of things that you're not supposed to do in kind of a jumbled order, without kind of looking at where are they redundant, and they feel like they're basically there so that 7 weeks later somebody can point to that part of the syllabus and say, I told you so. So on the left side of the screen here, example 2 is an example also from an IHP syllabus. This one is from Emily Larive in CSD, who shared us with this, but she wanted to credit Rita Olins for the idea to have this in her syllabus. Is the idea that if we're going to ask students for if we're going to demand of students what their responsibilities is, we should also communicate what our responsibilities are as an instructor, or as Emily has labeled it here, her faculty commitment to students and what they're going to do. So again, I think these are important places where you can try and help that hidden curriculum, but also think really carefully about what are we communicating about the nature of this partnership that I think all teaching and learning environments are going to be involved in. The last section here for equity-minded practice that we want to talk about before we move on to some activities is the idea of representing. And there's 2 aspects to this. There's representation in authorship. So who are the authors of the various works that you're using in your course, textbooks, articles, any readings, videos, etc. And then also thinking about how are different populations represented in the materials that you are sharing. So we could do a whole separate workshop just on this one aspect of equity-minded practice, with going through your syllabi, your D2L materials, and doing an audit of who are the authors that are present there and who are not present. Obviously, there are certain types of diversity here that are more visible and I guess therefore easier to identify, whereas there are others that are either not easy or not possible to identify. But we have the example here on the right. This was from a syllabus at the Institute, and we went and looked up images of all of the authors of the textbooks that course used, and what might that be communicating to students about the nature of that field and what expertise looks like in that field. So the idea here of representing is that it's important to have materials from a variety of audiences to hopefully reach students who are from a variety of audiences and prepare them for working with diverse populations as they go out and become the various types of health professionals they might be. The other aspect of this, as I mentioned, is looking at how are different populations represented in your course materials. So being mindful in your materials, are there places where there are stereotypes that are being reinforced? What types of diversity are represented in your things like your case studies, in your articles, and are they helpful? Are they harmful? What can you do to diversify the voices and perspectives that are present in the coursework that you ask students to go through? So those were the 6 equity-minded practices that we wanted to talk about, and you've got those listed and summarized in the workshop guide that we've sent out. We're going to start transitioning here into our activities that we are going to be doing today. And the first activity is a solo reflection activity that you're going to be doing. So you want to find your syllabus that we asked you to bring along for this, and the workshop guide that we sent out or posted the Dropbox link. Oh, Tasneem has just reposted the Dropbox link for people there. And we're going to give you a little less than 10 minutes because we're running a little behind, but we'd like you to work through some of the questions that start, I believe, at the bottom of page 3 of the handout, and thinking about your own syllabus and what your syllabus is and isn't doing with regard to these equity-minded practices. We encourage you, if you want, you can turn your camera off and work through that. We're then going to put you toward the end of the 10 minutes or slightly less than 10 minutes into some small groups of 2 or 3 to discuss what you found with your own syllabi with some other instructors who are present here today, and get ideas for how you might improve your syllabus. So I'm just going to start the little timer here.
Wait,
Tony, before we just
one
start.
second.
Yeah.
Before we put them in there were 2 things that came up in the chat that I just wanted to give them. So Deb, I saw your hands up. Were you going to ask about the contract question you had asked? So Deb had said she'd heard about how people think about the syllabus as a contract and was wondering if at the IHP it's considered that way. I want to kind of give that's a really common that people talk about the syllabus as a contract. I would say as a whole, part of what we're trying to do is also kind of push back on that so we can treat the syllabus as a different type of document. I would say at the IHP, and please anybody jump in if I'm wrong with this, I wouldn't say that it's like formally treated as that is formally like the syllabus is a contract. I think it depends on how you're engaging with it. But that's definitely very common. And I think part of that actually kind of set the tone of how people set up their syllabus. And I think it can have this kind of adverse effect. But when we're thinking about what kind of tone we want to set, then if we do need the syllabus to be a contract, then remember the syllabus is only one artifact of your learning. So, I mean, I know several people said, like Donna, I you mentioned that you put things in your welcome email or something like that. So how does your syllabus exist in concert with the full set of artifacts you have? So it's one tool, not all of them. And I think there was one other thing that they were also asked about the welcoming one when I gave the 2 examples of 1 and 2. Most people said 1 felt more welcoming. 2, there were also some questions about like, well, it felt more welcoming, some felt a little bit more human-centered. I would say overall, like 1 had more kind of welcoming and engaging, kind of challenging the power dynamics. That being said, that doesn't mean that there's none of these that are all right or all wrong. There's bits and pieces that you can take and choose from that. But I saw that question earlier up, so I wanted to make sure I answered that here too before we went in. Changes of boilerplate, and for the syllabus template, the IHP syllabus template, the only thing that is required are the headings. The content is up to the departments and the faculty. We actually have clarity on that. between our last syllabus audit workshop and this one. Wanted to make sure I gave that to everybody here too. So what's consistent from the IHP template are the headings themselves. The content you put in is determined by the departments, and they may have their particular accreditation thing, so that might be influencing the language, but IHP wide, it's just the headings and the sections. All right, so with those, I think we can give you all the solo time, and then we'll put you into the groups. And if you have anything else come up in the chat, feel free to